What is up, everybody? It's Brave Cat here, and today I'm going to be talking about the lost ancient empire of Tartaria. Now, I've been kind of banging my head against this, but was it really an advanced, forgotten society that was covered up in secrecy? Or, perhaps, are all the fringe conspiracies and theories all just some massive hoax to make people stupid? Well, I think I've, for the most part, gotten to the bottom of that. Now, there does seem to be some interesting truths kind of hidden within this whole story of the Tatars, Tartary, all these different maps. So we'll kind of get into some of those things. But first off, I'll be linking this video in the description because out of everything that I've gone through, this seems to actually put together the most of the truth. So yeah, it is pretty much debunked. When you go and look this up and you see all these videos, and there's more coming out every day about how advanced they were, how much of a cover-up there was, pretty much all of it, besides a few certain little theories here and there. Most of this is completely false, and you know, I am a conspiracy person, okay, and many of them have been coming true, but every once in a while you still come across one that seems to be just totally a load of crap, and that is kind of what we see here. So I wanted to do some digging for myself, and I had some AI help me out a little bit here, but I was looking into some of the maps, okay? So over here at the David Rumsey map collection, you can look through a lot of historical maps, and so I basically searched for two keywords here to get a pretty wide variety of stuff. And you know, there's a few of these maps in particular. This is one of the older ones I was able to find from 1787. This actually has a really good, pretty well put together map here. I mean, for the late 1700s anyway. And it has Tartary listed here, and you have Western Tartary, and then you have Russian Tartary. So it's a really massive area. And, you know, doing a little bit of research, you know, initially it was like, okay, so Tartary is just kind of a blanket term, basically, for used by Europeans and the Western world to describe these vast uncharted lands that mostly just had these kind of nomadic people populating them, and a lot of these areas were harsh. I mean, we can even just look at Google Maps here. This is basically what we're looking at, is from the Turkmenistan area, going all the way to like northern China, through Mongolia, all the way to the east here, the Sea of Japan, and then it also stretches up into Russia. So, I mean, look, most of this is very barren, very harsh climates, and difficult terrain to explore. So I think that obviously had a very large part of it, and I'm just going to make a basic video on this. Again, I'm going to be linking a much better video that goes into a lot of the details, but I just wanted to run through kind of some of my research and findings because, well, on the Frontier Signals website here, it is not all just about the solar science, earthquakes, and volcanism. History, ancient history, is going to play a big part of it, and that's why I've been banging my head against this theory, which, you know, it would be nice to have some of these older maps in here and kind of explaining who the Tatars really were, because it really is interesting and there is some truth to it, and I have my own theory as to why these conspiracies suddenly sprouted up, because I think there is an aspect of this that is trying to be hidden, and I'll go into that here. So this is probably the best map that I could find. And there's even like a book that was written in Latin. There's a lot of old books from back in this era, kind of the 17 to 1800s. And there's a lot more things I want to kind of dive into. I mean, some of this is pretty fascinating. So this map here with, all of Asia, we've got Arabia here, Turkey, Persia. So this here is like modern day Turkmenistan. Here's the Caspian Sea. And this is labeled Tartary or Tartary. We have Chinese Tartary, and then we have Russian Tartary. So again, this is describing these vast lands that, spans over 4,000 miles, depending on which way you measure it. And so, it kind of makes sense as to some of the descriptions going on here. However, there's something interesting within all of the kind of conspiracy and fringe theories. And so the thing that's being hidden, I believe anyway, kind of lies over here. So if you look into their religious history and their governments and even like kind of just their culture, they were actually pretty sophisticated. They had advanced metallurgy. They could work with steel. They had nomadic roots, but they kind of evolved into, a more sophisticated kind of society. They had advanced economics with trade routes. They had religious pragmatism. They included many different religions. They didn't really discriminate. They did have their own conquests. They weren't just peaceful. I mean, it does have to do with the Mongolian history, the Great Khans. It is very intertwined with that. However, for the Europeans at the time to basically call them barbarians and Mongols is definitely just a bias, a discriminatory bias on their part. Same with the Russian people who eventually annexed them, and their society and population eventually kind of fragmented at the end of what was called the Golden Horde in the 13th century. But they did, again, they were pretty sophisticated, and their governments were described as, a semblance of civil liberty. And that basically contrasted all of these surrounding empires that were despotic, which, basically tyrannical. They didn't have a monarchy. They didn't have like a major ruling class that dictated everything. They were actually probably some of the most free living people on the planet at the time, living in this vast stretch of area. This was the real mixing pot of different ethnicities, cultures, religions, ideas, inventions, it seems. And I think that's the real truth behind kind of why you don't hear about this in modern history, especially here in the West. I don't know about Eastern teachings, but here in the West, you never hear these words ever. All right, Tatars, Tartary, and I think the term Tartaria is a little bit more kind of plays into that conspiracy because, well, Tartaria sounds more like some sort of lost empire. But the truth is, like, this was the real label that was on most of these maps. And so, like, looking at some of these labeled Tartaria, you get into a lot more kind of fringe style maps here. Like, okay, let's just click on this one. See what this is here. So, yeah, this is one of the last remnants that you find on maps from the mid to late 1800s going into the 1900s, is this canal, or sometimes called the Gulf of Tartaria. And other than that, everything else has been essentially replaced. So if we go, I think I've got We've got another map here, which is from 1844. So it still has Chinese Tartary, but then the Russian side is now, this is just the Russian Empire. This is pretty much at the point where I think they, kind of annexed a lot of these kind of groups, the Tatars, and then you still have Western Tartary, and then that's about it. And then you go a little bit further. Well, this is also another 1844 map. There's some kind of different variants. So this one here, they basically just call it Mongolia. Again, a lot of the West, a lot of the Europeans, which is where these maps come from, they just see this whole area as basically barbarians and the Mongols, which is partially true to an extent. But basically the Tatar people, they eventually got conquered by the surrounding empires, especially from Europe, and to the victor are basically the ones that write history. So there is an inkling of truth that there is some history that got covered up, but to say that it involves advanced secret technology or massive sprawling cities with immaculate architecture, that's going a little bit too far. So honestly, I think this whole thing is what you could call a psyop. I almost kind of lost my mind just looking into this. I was like, I wanted to believe that there was a whole lot of truth in here. But no, you find a whole lot of confusing nonsense that blurs the lines between real history and actual speculative theories that hold any weight, Because there's certain aspects of these theories, like giants or certain architecture methods and whatnot, that do hold some weight. But then kind of the bulk of the conspiracies, are just complete nonsense. So anyways, that is kind of what I ran into. And look, I have been watching channels like Bright Insight. Well, okay, there's actually not that many channels that are exactly like Bright Insight. But, I've been interested in ancient history for quite a while, and not once has that Tartary really been brought up that much. And for good reason, it seems. Although, again, there does seem to be some truth in it. So if I could include something in that regard on this website, I will. Regarding like basically the truth within the truth, which is that the reason I think why this history of these peoples and these regions at the time were kind of more or less covered up is to basically hide the fact that it is possible for people to exist in a more free environment where they're not being discriminated for their religion. They can kind of pass their ideas freely, and they also can live in a sophisticated society without being governed by a dictatorship, a tyrannical government of sorts, a monarch, any of those things. Which, that was what democracy and capitalism was supposed to be for, but, we often find ourselves in the same exact boat as all these other empires, monarchs, kings, tyrannical forces. We live pretty much no differently, just under a different costume in the modern world. So again, I think that's the real reason why this is more hidden, is because it hides the fact that it is possible to be civilized and sophisticated while also maintaining a lot of human rights and natural freedoms. So yeah, that is basically it. Catch you on the next one, and hope you enjoyed this one.